Good afternoon. I'm getting on a little bit late. I was kind of relaxing after that bombardment of thoughts. Oh my gosh, I'm going to tell you, when I have that kind of recall like that, it by the time I'm done, I'm not done yet, so I'm not exhausted right now. I've been relaxing in between, but I'll be exhausted by the time this is all done. Patty Storia Carpenter said, well, we'll just curse April 23rd if he's born on a Sunday. My guess is my son was born on a Sunday. I'm not sure. I could look it up. But how would you have known that? I, a star. And then the other thing about that is I keep saying Andrea Oles, but it is Sue. How it could be the same? But it was, I thought it was Andrea that came up to me, but it could have been Sue. They look a lot alike. And that picture looks more like Andrea Oles than it does Sue, but they look a lot alike. They just were different in the, compartments up here. But that can all be fixed, right? And everyone's doing a 3-card Monty anyway. So I'm sure she's part of the 3-card Monty, and so is Maureen. Who's likely Sue? Because I saw her, it's like I didn't remember her being so big, and then all of a sudden she was shorter. Who even knows? I don't even know. But the first time I met her, she said her last name is Storia, I a star. Like, I guess, whatever. And I said, I'm Annette Garcia, I a burro. And there's the comment at the end. Chick ain't a burro no morrow. I said, I didn't call you a burro. Very first time I met her, we got in an argument. I said, I didn't call you a burro. I called me a burro. I'm a Mexican. Why would I call it? It doesn't even make any sense. She wouldn't listen. She stomped off. I had to try to explain it, but apparently she never really got it because at graduation, but see, she wouldn't have been graduated with my class. So that's why I just feel like it was Andrea Oles who did that. I don't know. Chick ain't a burro no morrow. There's a picture over there. Wow. A note from your author. I know what Negroes are going to say. Look, he's writing suburban tropical now. A puta, and she's not an underage snort-addicted mess. Not believable. Should I go down to the Feria and pick me up a more representative model? Would it be better if I turned Iban into this other puta I know? Jiraiya? Jayra. A friend and a neighbor in Villajuana who still lives in one of those old style pink wooden houses with the zinc roof. Jayra, your quintessential Caribbean puta, half cute, half not, who'd left home at the age of 15 and lived in Caracas, Madrid, Amsterdam, and Rome, who also has 2 kids, who'd gotten an enormous breast job when she was 16 in Madrid, bigger almost than Luba from Love and Rockets, but not as big as Billy, who claimed proudly that her apparato had paved half the streets in her mother's hometown. Would it be better if Oscar meets Ebone at the world-famous Lavacado, where Heyra works 6 days a week, where a brother can get his head and his fenders polished while he waits? Talk about convenience. Would this be better? Yes. But then I'd be lying. I know I've thrown a lot of fancy sci-fi in the mix, but this is supposed to be a true account of the brief, wondrous life of Oscar. Whoa. Can't we believe that an Iban can exist and that a brother like Oscar might be due a little luck after 23 years? This is your chance if blue pill continue, if red pill return to the matrix. The girl from Sabana Iglesia. In their photos, Iban looks young. It's her smile and the way she perks up her body for every shot as if she's presenting herself to the world. And if she's saying, ta-da, here I am, take it or leave it. She dressed young too, but she was a solid 36, perfect age for anybody but a stripper. In the close-ups, you can see the crow's feet, and she complained all the time about her little belly, the way her breasts and her ass were starting to lose their firm, which was why she said she had to be in the gym 5 days a week. When you're 16, a body like this is free. When you're 40, it's a full-time occupation. The third time Oscar came over, Iban doubled up on the scotches again and then took down her photo albums from the closet and showed him all the pictures of herself when she'd been 16, 17, 18, always on a beach, always in an early 80s bikini, always with big hair, always smiling, always with her arms around some middle-aged 80s yakab. Looking at those old hairy blancos, Oscar couldn't help but feel hopeful. Let me guess, he said, these are your uncles. Each photo had a date and a place at the bottom, and this was how he was able to follow Iban's puta's progress through Italy, Portugal, and Spain. I was so beautiful in those days, she said wistfully. It was true, her smile could have put out a sun, but Oscar didn't think she was any less fine now. The slight declensions in her appearance only seemed to add to her luster, the last bright before the fade, and he told her so. You're so sweet, mi amor. She knocked back another double and rasped, what's your sign? How lovesick he became. He stopped writing and began to go over to her house nearly every day, even when he knew she was working, just in case she'd call ill or decided to quit the profession so she could marry him. The gates of his heart had swung open and he felt light on his feet. He felt weightless. He felt lithe. His abuela steady gave him shit, told him that not even God loves a puta. Yeah, his tio laughed, but everybody knows that God loves a puto. A puto. His tio seemed thrilled that he no longer had a pajaro for a nephew. I can't believe it, he said proudly. The Palomo is finally a man. He put Oscar's neck in the New Jersey State Police patented nigger killer lock. When did it happen? I want to play that date as soon as I get home. Here we go again. Oscar and Iban at her house. Oscar and Iban at the movies. Oscar and Iban at the beach. Iban talked voluminously, and Oscar slipped some words in too. Iban told him about her two sons, Sterling and Perfecto, who lived with their grandparents in Puerto Rico, whom she saw only on holidays. They'd known only her photo and her money the whole time she'd been in Europe, and when she'd finally returned to the island, they were little men, and she didn't have the heart to tear them from the only family they'd ever known. They would have made me roll my eyes, but Oscar bought it hook, line, and sinker. She told him about the 2 abortions she'd had, told him about that time she'd been in jail in Madrid, told him how hard it was to sell your ass, asked, can you be impossible and not impossible at once, talked about how if she hadn't studied English in the UASD, she probably would have had it a lot worse, told him of a trip she'd taken to Berlin in the company of a rebuilt Brazilian tranny, a friend how sometimes the trains would go so slow, you could have plucked a passing flower without disturbing its neighbors. She told him about her Dominican boyfriend, the captain, and her foreign boyfriends, the Italian, the German, and the Canadian, the three banditos, how they each visited her on different months. You're lucky they all have families, she said, or I'd have been working this whole summer. He wanted to ask her not to talk about any of these dudes, but she would only have laughed. So all he said was, I could have shown them around Zurza. I hear they love tourists, and she laughed and told him to play nice. He in turn talked about the one time he and his dark college buddies had driven up to Wisconsin for a gaming convention, his only big trip, how they had camped out in a Winnebago reservation and drank Pabst with some of the local Indians. He talked about his love for his sister Lola and what happened to her. He talked about trying to make his own life. This is the only time that Yvonne didn't say anything. Instead, she poured them both drinks and raised her glass to life. They never discussed the amount of time they spent together. Maybe we should get married, he said once, not joking. And she said, I'd make a terrible wife. He was around so often that he even got to see her in a couple of her notorious moods when her alien princess part pushed to the fore, and she became very cold and uncommunicative when she called him an idiot Americano for spilling his beer. On these days, she opened her door and threw herself in bed and didn't do anything. Hard to be around her, but he would say, hey, I heard Jesus is down at the Plaza Central giving out condoms. He'd convince her to see a movie. The going out and sitting in the theater seemed to put the princess in partial check. Afterwards, she'd be a little easier. She'd take him to an Indian restaurant, and no matter how much her mood had improved, she'd insist on drinking herself ridiculous. So bad he'd have to put her in the truck and drive them home through a city he did not know. Early on, he hit on this great scheme. He called Clive's the evangelical taxista his family always used, who would swing by no sweat and lead him home. When he drove, she always put her head in his lap and talked to him, sometimes in Italian, sometimes in Spanish, sometimes about the beatings the women had given each other in prison, sometimes sweet stuff, and having her mouth so close to his nuts was finer than one might imagine. La Inca speaks. He didn't meet her on the street like he told you. His cousins, Los Idiotas, took him to a cabaret, and that's where he first saw her, and that's where ella se metió por sus ojos. Iban, as recorded by Oscar. I never wanted to come back to Santo Domingo, but after I was let go from jail, I had trouble paying back the people I owed, and my mother was sick, and so I just came back. It was hard at first. Once you've been fuera, Santo Domingo is the smallest place in the world. But if I've learned anything in my travels, it's that a person can get used to anything, even Santo Domingo. What never changes? Oh, they got close all right, but we have to ask the hard question again. Did they ever kiss in her Pathfinder? Did he ever put his hands up her super short skirt? Did she ever push up against him and say his name in a throaty whisper? Did he ever stroke that end of the world tangle that was her hair while she sucked him off? Did they ever fuck? Of course not. Miracles only go so far. He watched her for the signs that would tell him she loved him. He began to suspect that it might not happen this summer, but already he had plans to come back for Thanksgiving and then for Christmas. When he told her, she looked at him strangely and said only his name, Oscar, a little sadly. She liked him. It was obvious. She liked it when he talked his crazy talks, when he stared at a new thing like it might have been from another planet, like the one time she had caught him in the bathroom staring at her soapstone. What the hell is this peculiar mineral, he said. It seemed to Oscar that he was one of her few real friends, outside the boyfriends, foreign and domestic, outside the psychiatrist sister and San Cristobal, and her ailing mother and Sabana Iglesia. Her life seemed as spare as her house. Travel light was all she ever said about the house when he suggested he buy her a lamp or anything, and he suspected that she would have said the same thing about having more friends. He knew, though, that he wasn't her only visitor. One day he found 3 discarded condom foils on the floor around her bed. Had asked, "Are you having trouble with incubuses?" She smiled without shame. That's one man who doesn't know the word quit. Poor Oscar. At night he dreamed that his rocket ship, the Hijo de Sacrificio, was up and off, but that it was heading for the Ana Obregón barrier at the speed of light. Oscar at the Rubicon. At the beginning of August, Iban started mentioning her boyfriend, the Capitan, a lot more. Seems he'd heard about Oscar and wanted to meet him. He's really jealous, Iban said rather weakly. Just have him meet me, Oscar said. I make all boyfriends feel better about themselves. I don't know, Iban said. Maybe we shouldn't spend so much time together. Shouldn't you be looking for a girlfriend? I got one, he said. She's the girlfriend of my mind. A jealous third-world cop boyfriend? Maybe we shouldn't spend so much time together. Any other nigger would have pulled a Scooby-Doo double take. Eeyore would have thought twice about staying in Santo Domingo another day. Hearing about the Capitan only served to depress him, as did the spend less time crack. He never stopped to consider the fact that when a Dominican cop says he wants to meet you, he ain't exactly talking about bringing you flowers. One night, not long after the condom foil incident, Oscar woke up in his overly air-conditioned room and realized with unusual clarity that he was heading down the road again. The road where he became so nuts over a girl, he stopped thinking. The road where very bad things happened. You should stop right now, he told himself, but he knew with lapidary clarity that he wasn't going to stop. He loved Iban, and love for this kid was a Diaz, something that could not be shaken or denied. The night before, she'd been so drunk that he had to help her into bed, and the whole time she was saying, God, we have to be careful, Oscar. But as soon as she hit the mattress, she started writhing out of her clothes. Didn't care that he was there. He tried not to look until she was under her covers, but what he did see burned the edges of his eyes. When he turned to leave, she sat up, her chest utterly and beautifully naked. Don't go yet. Wait till I'm asleep. He lay down next to her on top of the sheets. Didn't walk home until it was starting to get light out. He'd seen her beautiful chest and knew now that it was far too late to pack up and go home, like those voices were telling him. Far too late. Last chance. 2 days later, Oscar found his Tio examining the front door. What's the matter? His Tio showed him the door and pointed at the concrete block wall on the other side of the foyer. I think somebody shot at our house last night. He was enraged. Fucking Dominicans. Probably hosed the whole neighborhood down. We're lucky we're alive. His mother jabbed her finger into the bullet hole. I don't consider this being lucky. I don't either, La Inca said, staring straight at Oscar. For a second, Oscar felt this strange tugging in the back of his head, what someone else might have called instinct. But instead of hunkering down and sifting through it, he said, we probably didn't hear it because of all of our air conditioners. And then he walked over to Iban's. They were supposed to be going to the Durante that day. No, the Duarte that day. Oscar gets beat. In the middle of August, Oscar finally meets the Capitan, but he also got his first kiss ever. So you could say that day changed his life. Iban had passed out again after giving him a long speech about how they had to give each other space, which he'd listened to with his head down and wondered why she insisted on holding his head during dinner then. It was super late, and he'd been following Clive's in the Pathfinder, the usual routine when some cops up ahead let Clive's pass and then asked Oscar to please step out of the vehicle. It's my truck, he explained. It's hers. He pointed It's not my truck, he explained. It's hers. He pointed to the sleeping Yvonne. We understand if you could pull over for a second. He did so, a little worried, but right then Yvonne sat up and stared at him with her light eyes. Do you know what I want, Oscar? I am, he said, too afraid to ask. I want, she said, moving into position, un beso. And before he could say anything, she was on him. The first feel of a woman's body pressing against yours. Who among us can ever forget that? And that first real kiss? Well, to be honest, I've forgotten both of these firsts, but Oscar never would. For a second, he was in disbelief. This is it. This is really it. Her lips plush and pliant, and her tongue pushing into his mouth. And then there were lights all around them. And he thought, I'm going to transcend. Transcend is mine. But then he realized that the two plainclothes who had pulled him over, who both looked like they'd been raised on high G planets, and whom we'll call Solomon Grundy and Gorilla Grodd for simplicity's sake, were beaming their flashlights into the car, and who was standing behind them, looking in on the scene inside the car with an expression of sheer murder. Why, the Capitan, of course, Yvonne's boyfriend. Grodd and Grundy yanked him out of the car, and did Yvonne fight to keep him in her arms? Did she protest the rude interruption to their making out? Of course not. Homegirl just passed right out again. The Capitan, a skinny 40-something habeo, standing near the spotless red Jeep, dressed nice in slacks and a crisply pressed white button-down, his shoes bright as scarabs. One of those tall, arrogant, acerbically handsome niggers that most of the planet feels inferior to. Also one of those very bad men that not even postmodernism can explain away. He'd been young during the Trujillo, so he never got the chance to run with some real power. Wasn't until the North American invasion that he earned his stripes, like my father. He supported the U.S. invaders, and because he was methodical and showed absolutely no mercy to the leftists, he was vaulted into the top ranks of military police. Was very busy under Demon Balaguer, shooting at syndications from the back seats of cars, burning down organizers' homes, smashing in people's faces with crowbars. The 12 years were good times for men like him. In 1974, he held an old woman's head underwater until she died. She tried to organize some peasants for land rights in San Juan. In 1977, he played Mazel Tov on a 15-year-old boy's throat with the heel of his Florsheim. Another communist troublemaker, good fucking riddance. I know this guy well. He has family in Queens, and every Christmas he brings his cousins bottles of Johnny Walker Black. His friends call him Fito, and when he was young, he wanted to be a lawyer. But then the Cali scene had pulled him, and he forgot about all that lawyering business. So you're the New Yorker. When Oscar saw the Capitan's eyes, he knew he was in deep shit. The Capitan, you see, also had close-set eyes. These, though, were blue and terrible, the eyes of Lee Van Cleef. If it hadn't been for the courage of his sphincter, Oscar's lunch and his dinner and his breakfast would have whooshed straight out of him. I didn't do anything, Oscar quailed. Then he blurted out, I'm an American citizen. The Capitan waved away a mosquito. I'm an American citizen, too. I was naturalized in the city of Buffalo and the state of New York. I bought mine in Miami, Gorilla Grodd said. Not me, Solomon Grundy lamented. I only have my residency. Please, you have to believe me. I didn't do anything. The Capitan smiled. Motherfucker had first world teeth. Do you know who I am? Oscar nodded. He was inexperienced, but he wasn't dumb. You're Yvonne's ex-boyfriend. I'm not her ex-novio, you maldito perigueo. The Capitan screamed, the cords of his neck standing out like a Kerfolsway drawing. I don't know. Lucy drawing. She said, "You were her ex," Oscar insisted. The Capitan grabbed him by the throat. "That's what she said," he whimpered. Oscar was lucky. If he had looked like my Pana Pedro, the Dominican Superman, or like my Benny, who was a model, he probably would have gotten shot right there. But because he was a homely slob, because he really looked like a maldito Paraguayo who had never had no luck in his life, the Capitan took Gollum pity on him and only punched him a couple of times. Oscar, who had never been punched a couple of times by a military-trained adult, felt like he had just been run over by the entire Steelers backfield circa 1977. Breath knocked out of him so bad he honestly thought he was going to die of asphyxiation. The Capitan's face appeared over his. "If you ever touch my mujer again, I'm going to kill you, Paraguayo." And Oscar managed to whisper, "You're the ex before Messrs. You're the ex," before Messrs. Grundy and Grad picked him up with some difficulty, squeezed him back into their Camry, and drove off. Oscar's last sight of Iban, the Capitan dragging her out of the Pathfinder cabin by her hair. He tried to jump out of the car, but Gorilla Grodd elbowed him so hard that all the fight jumped clean out of him. Nighttime in San Diego, a blackout, of course, even the lighthouse out for the night. Where did they take him? Where else? The cane fields. How's that for eternal return? Oscar, so bewildered and frightened, he pissed himself. "Didn't you grow up around here?" Grundy asked his dark-skinned pal. "You stupid dick-sucker. I grew up in Puerto Plata. Are you sure? You look like you speak a little French to me." On the ride there, Oscar tried to find his voice but couldn't. He was too shook. In situations like these, he had always assumed his secret hero would emerge and snap necks, a la Jim Kelly, but clearly his secret hero was out having some pie. Everything seemed to be moving so fast. How had this happened? What wrong turn had he taken? He couldn't believe it. He was going to die. He tried to imagine Iban at the funeral in her nearly see-through black sheath, but couldn't. Saw his mother and La Inca at the grave. Didn't we tell you? Didn't we tell you? Watched Santo Domingo glide past and felt impossibly alone. How could this be happening to him? He was boring. He was fat, and he was so very afraid. Thought about his mother, his sister, all the miniatures he hadn't painted yet, and started crying. "You need to keep it down," Grundy said. But Oscar couldn't stop, even when he put his hands in his mouth. They drove for a long time, and then finally, abruptly, they stopped. At the cane fields, Monsignors Grodd and Grundy pulled Oscar out of the car. They opened the trunk, but the batteries were dead in the flashlight, so they had to drive back to a commando by the batteries and then drive back. While they argued with the Comado owner about prices, Oscar thought about escaping, thought about jumping out of the car and running down the street screaming, but he couldn't do it. "Fear is the mind killer," he chanted in his head, but he couldn't force himself to act. They had guns. He stared out into the night, hoping that maybe there would be some U.S. Marines out for a stroll, but there was only a lone man sitting in his rocking chair out in front of his ruined house, and for a moment Oscar could have sworn the dude had no face. But then the killers got back into the car and drove. Their flashlight newly activated, they walked him into the cane. Never had he heard anything so loud and alien. The susurration, the crackling, the flashes of motion underfoot, snake, mongoose overhead, even the stars, all of them gathered in vainglorious congress. And yet, this world, seemingly strangely familiar to him, he had the overwhelming feeling that he'd been in this very place a long time ago. It was worse than deja vu, but before he could focus on it, the moment slipped away, drowned by his fear. And then the two men told him to stop and turn around. We have something to give you, they said amiably, which brought Oscar back to the real. Please, he shrieked, don't. But instead of the muzzle flash and the eternal dark, Grodd struck him once hard in the head with the butt of his pistol. For a second, the pain broke the yoke of his fear, and he found the strength to move his legs and was about to turn and run. But then they both started wailing on him with their pistols. It's not clear whether they intended to scare him or kill him. Maybe the Capitan had ordered one thing and they did another. Perhaps they did exactly what he asked, or perhaps Oscar just got lucky. Can't say. All I know is it was the beating to end all beatings. It was the Gotterdammerung of beatdowns. A beatdown so cruel and relentless that even Camden, the city of ultimate beatdown, would have been proud. Yes, sir, nothing like getting smashed in the face with those patented Pockmeyer presentation grips. He shrieked, but it didn't stop the beating. He begged, and that didn't stop it either. He blacked out, but that was no relief. The niggers kicked him in the nuts and perked him right up. He tried to drag himself out the cane, but they pulled him back. It was like one of those nightmare 8 a.m. MLA panels, endless. Man, Gorilla, Grodd said, the kid is making me sweat. Most of the time they took turns striking him, but sometimes they got into it together, and these were moments Oscar was sure that he was being beaten by 3 men, not 2, that the faceless man from in front of the colmado was joining them. Toward the end, as all life began to slip away, Oscar found himself facing the abuela. She was sitting in her rocking chair, and when she saw him, she snarled, "What did I tell you about those putas? Didn't I tell you were going to die?" And finally, Grodd jumped down on his head with both his boots, and right before it happened, Oscar could have sworn that there was a third man with them, and he was standing back behind some of the cane. But before Oscar could see his face, it was good night, sweet prince, and he felt like he was falling again, falling straight for Route 18, and there was nothing he could do, nothing at all to stop it. Clives to the rescue. I'm going to read this because I want to. Clives to the rescue. The only reason he didn't lay out in the rustling, endless cane for the rest of his life was because Clives, the evangelical taxista, had had the guts and the smarts, and yes, the goodness, to follow the cops on the sly. And when they broke out, he turned on his headlights and pulled up to where they'd last been. He didn't have a flashlight, and after almost half an hour of stomping around in the dark, he was about to abandon the search until the morning. And then he heard someone singing, a nice voice too, and Clives, who sang for his congregation, knew the difference. He headed towards the source full speed, and then, just as he was about to part, the last stalks of tremendous wind ripped through the cane, nearly blew him off his feet, like the first slap of a hurricane, like the blast of an angel might lay down on takeoff, and then, just as quickly as it had kicked up, it was gone, leaving behind only the smell of burned cinnamon, and there, just behind a couple stalks of cane, lay Oscar, unconscious and bleeding out of both ears and looking like he was one finger tap away from dead. Clives tried his best, but he couldn't drag Oscar back to the car alone, so he left him where he was. Just hold on, drove to a nearby Beatty and recruited a couple of Haitian braceros to help him, which took a while because the braceros were afraid to leave the Beatty lest they get whooped as bad as Oscar by their overseers. Finally, Clives prevailed, and back they raced to the scene of the crime. This is a big one. One of the braceros cracked. Mucho platanos, another joked. Mucho platanos, said a third, and then they heaved him into the back seat. As soon as the door shut, Clives popped his car into gear and was off, driving fast in the name of the Lord, the Haitians throwing rocks at him because he had promised to give them a ride back to their camp. Okay. We will pick this up tomorrow on day 105. And this ends day 21 days until Christmas. This ends day 21 of 21 days. So I will see you tomorrow. We have 20 days left until Christmas. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. Thank you so much for joining me. It seems like Junot Diaz is a woman from what I have, but I'm not sure, right? I'm not sure if the author is a woman or not. Did we read anything about him, her? I doubt it. So, oh, my eyes are tired. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. Thanks so much for joining me here in the classroom with the teacher. This has been the reading room. Thanks. Oh, what a great book.